Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris and welcome to a brand new episode of Bionicle Fanon Reviews, the show where I review some of the canon and non-canon Bionicle models that I find particularly interesting, or in this case, have won a Duckbricks Fanon contest. So a couple of months ago, I hosted the Bionicle Fanon contest for the Dinosaurs of Bota Magna. This was the second contest we ever did, and we got so many entries in, particularly so many large category entries, that I couldn't just review one of the winners. Oh no, because today we will be reviewing one of the many different finalists of the Dinosaurs of Bota Magna Fanon contest. If you look over there, this is a life-size version of the model that we are reviewing today. I am incredibly excited to showcase this to all of you because it has been a lot of months in the making. Many Bricklink orders were involved in terms of getting that fully built. I have a massive box of dinosaur parts that I have been building off of, and there are so many dinos we have yet to cover. And so, let's, without further ado, jump right into this particular build. Okay, so here we have the Lumbering Plintaanis by Bionicle. This was one of the 12 finalists in our Bionicle Dinosaurs of Bota Magna Fanon contest for the large category, and man is this a really interesting aesthetic for a Bionicle dinosaur. So one of the things that immediately caught my eye about this creature is obviously the inclusion of all sorts of different foliage elements across the entirety of the dinosaur itself. You have vines creeping down its neck, you have a tree sprouting out of the top of its head, you have some leaves growing on the underside of its jaw and kind of on the sides of the legs here, and all of these really make it feel that this is a very ageless or timeless creature. Maybe this has been around for years or centuries, allowing trees to literally grow onto its back, making this one of the most unique dinosaurs that we were able to build for this contest. And I'm really excited to bring the review to all of you. So much like many of our other Bionicle reviews, we will be taking a look at this from a few key points like posability, building techniques, articulation, whatnot, and stuff like that, aesthetics, and as well as believability in universe, and so we'll be basically going on those same points, although it is a little bit different because this is a custom model depicting a Bionicle dinosaur, which sets us apart from some of the other builds. Now starting off with posability, this is an interesting one because it is fairly stable. It does stand up on its four legs, but I believe the front legs probably could have had just a little bit more friction, and this is why, because if you're on a slippery surface, the legs will tend to kind of splay apart like this. It's not that bad of a problem if you are paying careful attention to it and you really try to stand it up like so. I mean, here you can kind of see it balancing on the tail and the two front legs there, but really it does feel like it is very difficult to actually get these to align well. This bends at the knee, just like so you can get a full range of articulation with the foot and the leg itself, but they do have a lot of effort to kind of keep it up. And the same kind of goes for the neck. Obviously, it is using friction joints all the way throughout the entire build, so most of it is fully covered, but then again, a lot of it is also being held up by these string pieces, which were a really clever way to make sure the head doesn't collapse. When I was building it, if you leave the string pieces off, your head is still probably going to be fine, but these really keep it from falling forward, so I do appreciate that. The jaw can be open and closed, which is really nice. I like the inclusion of these particular pieces, which do seem like they work quite well in conjunction with each other for the jaw here. I'm going to try to bend the head down, or maybe push this back a little bit so you can see it more clearly, but there you can have it, the jaw opening and closing, which is a really nice touch. I do really like that. And of course, you have the back legs as well, which they can be moved around. I wouldn't necessarily recommend moving them around a ton because they are pretty important to keeping this standing, but yeah, you can get a pretty good range of motion for that back leg there. You can bend it fully at the knee and even the foot, so you have pretty much all the articulation you would expect here. And then of course the dual tails. This is another design choice I like. The tail actually splits into two. It's a little bit cramped back here in my review studio, but you can have able to bend these all the way around. You can actually have the ability to just move them in whatever directions you want, and again, it does stand on both feet, so they can be off the ground, which is very nice, but for the most part, I usually just kind of keep them swayed back. I do like the inclusion of the Gress pieces at the back there, or the Gresh blades, because I think that fits the aesthetic quite well. Now moving on, honestly, that's pretty much all I have to say about articulation, but one thing you may be noticing is that the legs are already splaying outwards quite a lot just by kind of moving it around, and it is kind of falling over. It's not as bad as some other models for sure. It's certainly not as bad as a lot of other builds, but this is a little bit awkward. You never want it to be in a position like this, and you really do have to kind of keep fighting to keep these legs up. They do tend to just splay outwards if you don't have a lot of traction on the feet, and I would have liked maybe, say for example, just a rubber piece on the back of the feet here, or maybe two rubber pieces, kind of like they have those Technic rubber elements. I feel like that would have provided a lot of friction because, again, you really do have to fiddle with it to make sure it is standing up straight. Now moving on to the rest of the build, honestly, that's pretty much all I have to say in terms of articulation. There's a lot of little stuff that you can move around, like you can change the positioning of the way the trees work, like maybe you want this one to be kind of going over the body itself, so you can change that around, or you can change like these particular vines. All in all, it's like a really fun build to just pose around because there's so many different vines and tree elements around it. This whole piece kind of just curves around the upper leg itself, so lots of little things that you can move around, but for the most part, the most important stuff I've covered in terms of posability. It's a shame it does tend to be very front heavy and does tend to kind of topple over on those front legs. I did notice, however, the builder did suggest you actually put a clear stand here, so they did account for it. They did recommend putting a clear stand here. I think it does stand up fine without it. I mean, this is pretty okay. Sure, it is a little bit fragile in terms of the way that the front legs are constructed, and nothing's really going to break off, but you're going to have a lot of wobbling in the way the neck is constructed here. Like, that is a good amount of wobble that I don't know how I feel about that, but nothing really will break off. It will just kind of tend to collapse from certain points here and there. Moving on, though, to building techniques. Now, obviously, my favorite thing about the set is the inclusion of the foliage elements, which really paint a really unique picture of what kind of creature this is. It really does feel, again, that this is something that has blended with nature itself, and there are vines creeping up the legs, there are vines going along the neck here, and it really does feel like, again, this is really one with the environment of Bota Magna, and that was what really drew my eye about this particular model. Now, there are a few kind of awkward ways in which it is positioned that do feel a little bit odd to me. The way that the neck kind of curves outwards and then straight upwards from the bottom here is a little bit odd. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but again, you could maybe try to make it go a little bit higher, but then you kind of tend to mess with the way the strings work. So there's a few weird fiddly things about it. I do like the design of most of the legs, although I feel like the front legs probably could have been a little bit better, but then we're going into aesthetics because it does feel very skinny when it gets down, particularly down to this part of the legs. It does feel a little bit too skinny for me. These are done really well, though. I love the building techniques actually being used to construct the back legs. These feel very solid and do have a good amount of detail in the brown kind of Exoforce robot arms there, and then you've got some of the actual Bionicle Stars feet elements here in black, which is really good, and of course you even have the toes being integrated in these particular brown elements themselves, so everything about it is really great. And I think the most impressive part to me is the torso. The torso came together really interestingly, and I do feel like a lot of effort was put into adding places for the vines to sit. Now, one downside, though, is that, to be completely honest, I definitely feel like the way that the neck is constructed and the tail is constructed is maybe just a little bit too simple. Essentially what you do is you literally, I mean, you can see it, you just get these CCBS joints, slap friction add-ons onto them. It does consume a lot of pieces, and then just kind of stack them, and there's nothing really there to add on to stability. Comparing it to some of the other dinosaur entries in the contest, for instance, some of the long-necked ones used actual longer CCBS parts to have Technic beams sticking them together, so there was a little bit of variability there, but here it just feels like you are just sticking on these beams all together, and while it does make sense for the tail to be split, I do like the split tail feature. This definitely feels a little bit odd how there's just a sizable gap in the neck when you look at it from certain angles. I would have much preferred the neck to be one solid piece if there was a way to just, I don't know, use like segments that were a little bit longer to attach them together and really just make this feel like one segment. Because of this, you can tend to have stuff where certain times one part of the neck is not really aligning with the other one, so you want to actually stick them together, which is what obviously you can do physically by just moving the joint around, but just by looking around and kind of moving the head, it does kind of feel like I would have really preferred the pieces to be joined together somehow rather than being two separate things. It's a minor thing though, and it doesn't really affect the build that much. I just figured I would point it out. Now the head itself is again actually one of my favorite parts about the model itself. I do think that the head is done really well in the way that it's constructed. I love the choices of the pieces here, from the kind of quake breakers that Whenua had as well as the Pohatu claws. That really looks like the jaw of an herbivore. I really do like the look and feel of the way that this creature is opening its mouth. It feels like it could be chewing grass or something, or eating from the tall tree tops. So I really do appreciate that. That is very cool to me. Now of course we have the addition of the tree, and I think the banana pieces are really good actually, because it adds to the yellow color scheming of the model itself. And then of course you have kind of this multi-eyed type of setup here, with you've got like some eyes for the Roxy piece, but then you also have the main eyes here kind of encirculated by these brown eye holes. So I think overall the head is really good. The torso is great in terms of building techniques. It's just the tail and the neck do feel like they could have been a little bit improved. Now moving on to aesthetics, I am very, very happy with the aesthetics of this model, because this model selected what its vibe would be, what the color scheme would be, and really sticks with it. You have obviously this kind of browns and greens for the foliage and the nature aspects of it. You have some silver armoring suggesting that this has been kind of augmented with some sort of armor or some sort of kind of biomechanical aspects to it. And then you have kind of this whole yellow piece, which I definitely feel could have maybe been improved by a few more details, but I do like the way the color scheme stacks up, where you have this internal structure of black and gray and then yellow armor on the outside. And the color scheme of yellow, brown, and green predominantly really contrasts nicely with each other, and I didn't think I would have been saying that until I actually saw this model, where the colors really do feel like they work out well for this particular build. But with that, I think it's now time to move on from aesthetics and talk a little bit about how it compares to other buildings or other creatures from the Bionicle world. And so because of that, we are going to bring over an Agori and a Glatorian. Here is the Agori Ranu, and he actually can fit below this creature pretty much, which I think is very, very cool to see. And then of course we have the Glatorian Akar as well, which is a standard size of Glatorian here, and he kind of just goes up to the top of the torso, especially when putting it together. This is a really nicely scaled creature, because it definitely does feel like this is something that towers over the Glatorian and Agori. It's not phenomenally large, like obviously this isn't in scale with like, say, an actual real-world Brachiosaurus would look like, for instance, because that would be way, way, way bigger. But it's a nice scale to actually be able to compare these against each other, and it really does feel like it fits in with the world pretty well. My only complaint is that maybe these surfaces are a little bit too smooth. I love CCBS, but this does use a lot of it, like especially around the neck and the tail, and even the green foliage parts are Lego system. Honestly, if you look at the actual Bionicle G1 elements being used here, there's not a lot. You've got one being used for the detail here. Of course, you've got like a Visorak foot, you have the Gresh blades, and as well as kind of an armor piece on the back, but honestly, that's kind of it. For the most part, a lot of these pieces are CCBS or system, which I don't disagree with. I don't actually dislike the inclusion, but it does feel a little bit out of place compared to characters like this, who are covered in greebles and pistons and other details. So I definitely feel like believability in universe is a little bit mixed. But so with that, I think it's time that we actually sum up the main points for this particular review. Starting off, of course, with posability. Now, posability is a little bit mixed, to be honest. It is very, very posable. You can move it all around with the tail and the legs, but the front legs are just a little bit too narrow, and they don't have as much support as I would have hoped. I definitely wish that it was a little bit more stable on the front, and if they literally just used the same exact techniques for the back legs as they did with the front legs, that would have been fantastic, because this uses friction joints, it uses really sturdy and stocky legs, but these are just a little bit skinny and tend to splay outwards, especially because the front feet are pretty small as well. Overall, though, I love the fact that you can actually kind of mimic the chewing function with the mouth here. That is a really fun one to get. You can move around the two ends of the tail, so I think I'm going to give posability a 7 out of 10. Shame how it's a little bit liable to topple over on the front here, but everything else is pretty okay, especially with articulation. Moving on to building techniques. This one again is one that I feel that most of the most impressive building techniques went into the torso, the head, and even the back legs, and then the neck and the tail leave a little bit to be desired. And I talked a lot about this early in the review, so I'm not going to harp on it. Building techniques, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10, because I love the way that these are done, especially with the foliage. It just looks really good to me in the way the head is constructed. Perfect blend with system, G1 pieces, CCBS, Technic, you name it. This is a really good blend of pieces. And then you get to the neck, which honestly feels like it could have been a lot more interesting and a lot more complex in the way it was built. I don't really like how this can split open too much and tend to get misaligned. I'm not a big fan of that. I really do wish it was kind of a little bit more sturdy in the way it was held together. And the tail itself, while nice to get a split tail, does kind of feel like it is a little bit underbuilt or under-armored, especially for kind of what this is. Moving on, though, to overall aesthetics. Now that's going to get a 9.5 out of 10 from me. I just love the aesthetics of this creature. I love the design concept behind it. Having the trees be growing on the sides of it and off the top and in the middle is just so cool. I love the way that is done. I cannot rave about that enough because I just really appreciate the aesthetics and detailing of this. The only downside is that, I just wish these didn't split apart, because if it didn't do that, then this would have been perfect 10 out of 10 for aesthetics, but overall it is very, very close. And finally, in terms of believability in universe, I'm going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. I think that this does fit in okay with the rest of the builds, but I definitely do feel like it maybe could have used a little bit more pieces for the G1 aesthetic and style, because there's a lot of smooth textures here. There's a lot of CCBS, there's a lot of system, there's a lot of just standard vines and standard kind of system smooth pieces for the trees, which isn't a bad thing, but I definitely feel like maybe there could have been a little bit more made to allow it to fit just a little bit better in terms of someone who actually would be living on that world. But overall, very, very happy to add this to my collection. I'm a big fan of the way that the aesthetics of this particularly turned out. I love the way this is built, and I hope you've enjoyed this review. That about sums up our review of the Lumbering Plintaanis. That's an awesome name, by the way. I love that name. By Bionicle. I hope you've been enjoying these Dinosaur Bionicle Fanon Contest finalist reviews, and stay tuned to Duckbricks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Bye for now.